I'm Jennifer and welcome to my library. I'm a chaotic neutral mechanical engineer who's really into permaculture and wants to talk about books. So let's talk about books. Today I want to share some tips for you on how to thrift for books and shop at thrift stores for books. So the first tip is to look at the organizational structure of the thrift store. You might find that there are favorite thrift stores of yours to go shopping specifically for books. Some thrift stores do not organize their books really at all. Maybe they'll have a children's section, general adult books, and maybe like a nonfiction section. Other may try to do some alphabetizing by last name, and some might go through and organize books into relatively niche genres. I know some of my favorite thrift stores go ahead and lump things into various different nonfiction genres, like there might be a nature nonfiction genre and like a science fiction section. Those are pretty helpful for if you're trying to explore different types of books. They've already done a lot of the work for you in figuring out what type of book it is and who might be interested in it. Otherwise, if it's organized by last name alphabetized, that's still pretty good because you can look for authors that you know you're interested in reading. Especially for classics, you can look for copies of classic books, which thrift stores are a really good source for finding copies of classics for cheap. Also, don't forget to check out the children's section. You might find some gems there. I know I have. And also the nonfiction section can have some really excellent books as well. My next tip would be to look at the pricing structure for the specific thrift store that you're at. Some will have it based on like hardcovers, might be like $2, and then there will be trade paperbacks, which might be like $1.50, and then mass market paperbacks could be $1.50. So then you can know, okay, I don't want to take too many risks with hardcovers because that'll be more expensive, but I can take a lot of risks with mass market paperbacks. That's kind of how I approach things, but it really depends on how much money you're willing to spend, how many books you're willing to buy and not know that they're going to be something that you'll love. My next tip has to do with the information that you're obtaining when you're looking at the spine of a book on the shelf. So you're only going to pull out books that really speak to you from the spine. And when you're looking at the spine, what I do a lot of the time is look at author name. So if I might recognize an author or the title, sometimes I'll recognize the title as well as something that I'm looking for. Like I found Before the Coffee Gets Cold at a thrift store, and that was something that I was interested in reading beforehand. So the title, the author, I would not go by the spine design at all. Genre information, maybe publisher information, like you'll see if it's like Tor books, then you'll get an idea that it's like science fiction or something. Or you can get an idea that it's young adult if it's a certain publisher. So once you found something that you're interested in, for example, if I look at this spine, I see it's called Woman on the Edge of Time. It's fiction. Interesting title. This is a compelling title. I pull it out and I look at the front cover. For me, I'm gonna say this is gonna be one of the cheaper books. It's gonna be like maybe 50 cents. So maybe it's worth just giving it a shot. You're not really gonna get a ton from the cover, except maybe some genre marketing information. This is older, so it's not like relevant to this day genre information. So then I'm gonna go read the back synopsis. And from the synopsis is what I'm gonna figure out if I'm gonna take the book or not. There are definitely times where I take a risk based on the synopsis, where I know it could either be a mid-tier book or something that I'll really like, and I'll usually take that risk if it's something that I pick up at the thrift store just because it's so much cheaper than buying books in any other way. So I'd say generally, if you're having a hard time with the thrift stores that you're using, go and explore other thrift stores in your area if that's possible, and you might find one that really caters to somebody like you, that they have a really excellent organizational structure, or the people who are donating the books there are the types of readers that you are. Regardless of where you go, I think you'll be able to find some of the classics for relatively cheap, and that's a great way to start building up your own personal library. So that brings me to my next tip, and that is to focus on things that you know a little bit better. So especially before I was a more broadly aware reader, before I was like read enough to understand what I liked, I would pick things like, I'm pointing at it, We Bought a Zoo, because I knew generally based on movie trailers and stuff what that was about. Or I might pick up something like The Halloween Tree because it's by Ray Bradbury. So I definitely did a lot of shopping like that when I was younger. Things that said, now a major motion picture, I would pick up. I'd say generally don't be too concerned about getting something that you won't like. You can always start reading it and then redonate it. It's not a huge commitment to keep and cherish the book forever. One of the great things about buying books at thrift stores is that they are so inexpensive that you can take risks on things that you don't know. I feel way more concerned about taking a risk on a book in a bookstore because it's like you're putting $20 down that you're gonna love this book. And I don't love most of the books that I read. Be open to exploration. There are plenty of things that I've gotten from thrift stores that I had no idea that I would fall in love with. Let me pick out a handful of like my favorite books that I've gotten from thrift stores, and I can share some information about them. So I've picked out a handful of books for my shelves that I have picked out from thrift stores previously and that I loved, and explain a little bit about why I picked them out and what they have done for my personal library. So the first book that I have to share is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. I saw this at the thrift store, and unfortunately there's like some sticker shenanigans going on, but I recognized this, a fairly popular book at the time, and that's why I got it. I didn't know anything about it. I'd just seen the cover a lot, which is how I get some of my books sometimes. Picking this out led me to reading other books by Kazuo Ishiguro, and I ended up really loving them, and now I have 4 books by this author. I have The Buried Giant, Clara and the Sun, The Remains of the Day, and this now. I also got The Buried Giant from the thrift store, and I absolutely loved it, so I could have picked that one out as well. So that's one that goes on author name recognition and cover recognition. There used to be this huge thrift store near my hometown that had like the bins of unsorted books outside, like under easy ups and stuff, and you could rummage through them and get each one for like 50 cents. That's where I got Green Hills of Africa by Ernest Hemingway. I used to go through those bins looking for classic authors all the time. And so I got a bunch of books from Hemingway. I got Green Hills of Africa, The Sun Also Rises, before I'd ever read Hemingway. Then I read this, and I loved it. I loved it so much. It's been a really long time since I've read it, but this kind of opened up my love for Hemingway. And it also started my library collection for Hemingway. Recently, like last year I think, I picked up a copy of The Old Man and the Sea, also by Ernest Hemingway. This was also from a thrift store and was just a wonderful find. With enough patience and enough trips to the thrift store, you can really get a lot of wonderful works from authors that you may want to collect. My one big gigantic exception to this is Kurt Vonnegut. I don't think I have ever in my entire life found anything by Vonnegut at a thrift store. And I have searched because I have read 6 Vonnegut books, probably, and I ended up just purchasing them online because I could not for the life of me ever find anything Vonnegut at a thrift store. So I don't know if that'll be a similar experience for you and some other author, but it does happen. You won't find everything that you want. This is another example of a classic author, Tolstoy, and I found something that I loved so much in this book. I haven't actually ever finished reading this book, but I read this short story, Happy Ever After, also sometimes called Family Happiness. I just loved it so much. Now, I cannot actually remember if I got this from like a library, Friends of the Library sale where books are like 50 cents, or if this was from a thrift store, but I did pick up Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. Again, this was by recognition. I've heard that this is a good book, and I thought, okay, let me pick up a copy. I'll read it and then I'll donate it to my little free library, because I thought it might be kind of popular. I ended up reading this and loving it so much that I don't want to get rid of it. I want to keep it. You can find some real gems if you look. And if you read a bunch. One of my absolute favorite books that I read this year was The Gift of the Deer by Helen Hoover. This was such a strange selection. I went to this thrift store that has, it's one of my favorite thrift stores to go to for books because they do organize by genre. And their nonfiction organization is also excellent because they do have kind of like an environmental and like a nature section. And so I picked this up in the nonfiction nature section. And this is a wonderful nature memoir about deer. I would have never, ever picked this up if it weren't for just randomly seeing it at the thrift store. This is probably the book that I am the most grateful for the existence of thrift stores selling books, and that is The Ways of a Mud Dauber by George D. Schaefer. This was published by Stanford University Press, and it's from 1950 something? 1951, I think? 1949. If I look at this, to buy it online, it's exceedingly expensive because this is an incredibly niche book, but this was my favorite book that I read all of last year. I read like 170 books or something, and this was the one. And I got this at a thrift store. I would have never picked it up, ever. Also, such a crazy book to select because there's no synopsis, obviously, so I had to go into the book and kind of like flip around a little bit. From flipping around a little bit, I was like, oh, this is for me. And it so was. So that's my little advertisement for going out, exploring thrift stores, seeing what kinds of books they have to offer. There are some wonderful things that people are getting rid of from their own home libraries that are just waiting for you to pick up. It does take a little time, I should say. Maybe my last tip, spend some time. Again, first get your bearings. Figure out the organizational structure, figure out the pricing structure, consider what you're kind of looking for, but then just be open to the experience of looking. Have a bit of time to spend to really look at these books that you're interested in. What are you doing, bud? Take it as a fun experience, and I'm sure you won't only have a great time, but you'll find some wonderful books as well. I don't want you to eat my plant. If you could refrain, please. So that is all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did enjoy it, consider sharing it with a friend who you think would also like it. Consider liking and subscribing. And let me know in the comments, what is the best book you have ever gotten from the thrift store? And I will see you again soon.